Well, in today's big interview, Gidon Novick, who recently resigned from the Takatso consortium, which is in the process of acquiring South African Airways. Gidon, great to be talking with you just a couple of days after that announcement. Now, a mutual friend who shall remain nameless, because I think you'd be a bit surprised at who he is, said to me he was always surprised that Gidon had got involved with South African Airways, with a consortium in the first place. So maybe that's the best place to start, just to go retrace the steps. The privatization, if you like, of South African Airways goes back a long time now, and you were involved from the outset, presumably also to be the chief executive. But how did you get involved in all of that?
Well, you know what, Alec, it was actually in the middle of COVID. I was out of the industry, as you know, for quite some time. I was actually sitting in Plettenberg Bay, kind of a little bit bored, thinking of something to do. And I called up the Department of Public Enterprises and eventually got to talk to one or two of their consultants. And I just said, what's going on with SAA? And, it was in business rescue. I've got some thoughts and ideas on how things could unfold. And we kind of had a few conversations, but at that time, the DPE were going through a RFP to find a strategic equity partner. And as you recall, they had a bank, RMB, were helping them with that. And I think about 6 months later, that came to nothing. And I then got the call from the DPE to say, we've rethought this thing. We'd like to do a deal. We're going to be, we're quite flexible on the terms. And it was at that point that I thought, actually, here's something that can be done. Obviously, the aspiration to, fix something that was such a burden and continues to be, I guess, on the state and on, the South African public was quite appealing. So that was the start of it all. And, as you know, it's had a long story since then.
So they approached you after you'd initially approached them. But what made you interested? What made you keen, or even what gave you the idea that you could take over what was then supposedly a very big airline?
Yeah, I mean, even at that time, I suppose, when they're in business rescue, it had already been whittled down quite significantly. And, it needed, in my view, it needed a completely new start. It had potential, the brand had potential if it was relaunched, particularly if it was, kind of a ground-up approach to the business. In other words, the market's completely changed. COVID changed aviation potentially forever. And this was a chance to, do something fresh and new and to get involved. So that was the start of it all. And, quite maybe naive in many respects, but I think my whole career is, haven't had an element of naivety. And, I'm a bit of a dreamer at times, but I think it was, it felt like it was really worth giving it a go and trying to make a difference to, not only to SAA, but just to give South Africans a sense that, a lot of these things that haven't worked in the past can work in the future if they're given the right focus and the right skills and the right intent. These things can be fixed.
But it was an uphill battle from day one. Lots of negative media coverage. You and the Takatso consortium, and you can tell us in a moment how you got together with them, were made out to be greedy opportunists who were taking advantage of the situation. In fact, there was even some suggestions in the media that you guys were being favored by the government in this whole instance. Now, I mean, we've known each other for long enough, and I've certainly done some numbers on South African Airways, and to me and to our mutual friend, we were very surprised that you would have gone into something like that, given the massive risk and the huge potential downside.
Yeah, I mean, the value of a business, I guess, is, what can it do in the future? What can it generate? our plan, and we spent, myself and our team spent many, many months building the business plan, doing the analysis. And what we came up with was actually what we thought a very viable plan. It was a very modest plan. It was a plan that basically, relaunched the airline, almost from scratch. Relaunched it, on a different basis with, very commercial principles, a highly efficient operating structure, extensive use of technology to create efficiencies in the business, collaborations with other airlines as part of it. So that was really the business plan we came up with. And, we were quite confident, and actually are still quite confident, that there is a possibility and there is a scenario where this business works and becomes successful and sustainable.
So what happened? Why? Tell me about Takatso. How did you get together with them?
Yeah, so they were, we actually had a discussion independently just about the aviation sector. They were investors, as you know, or still are, in Lanseria Airport, so they had a peripheral interest in aviation. They had also been involved in a couple of other bids for airlines, including the Comair bid, which they weren't successful at. So they had a residual interest in airlines. And so we got talking, and there was there seemed to be some logic in terms of putting a capital provider together with the skills provider into a consortium and doing a deal. So the principle of it, I think, was pretty sound. They had to find the capital, we had to bring the skills, and that was the basis of the consortium and ultimately the transaction that's still in progress.
And then it became, or certainly to the outside, like you were walking through treacle.
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult. We were, from the start, you just got the sense that we were being excluded, which didn't bother us tremendously at the outset. We were, and the team were building Lyft and spending all our time and effort and energy on Lyft, which has turned out really well. Just kind of we're on the periphery of the entire transaction. But it got to a point, and it's been bothering me for quite some time, but it got to a point where it just was not, comfortable at all to be a director of a company without having any line of sight into what was going on. And really importantly, we committed to raise capital to fund the relaunch of SAA, a large sum of capital. And I was just completely in the dark as to whether that capital was actually being raised or committed, or whether progress was being made. And, I saw that as a red light as to, whether this thing is actually going to happen and whether we can make good on the commitments that we had made.
When you say we were excluded, who's we?
Well, we being, we're the minority shareholders in the consortium. So Harith has 80% of the consortium. We have 20%. And as minority partners, we were kept in the dark.
So Harith was busy negotiating with Department of Public Enterprises, and you didn't know really what the process was?
No. Outside of the initial MOU, we were very involved. We concluded that fairly quickly, made the announcement, I think it was June 2021. And I think it was fairly clear from that MOU who would be doing what and how it would unfold. But then, the serious, follow-up efforts in terms of concluding the transaction started taking place, and as well as, the all-important capital raising process, which we really wanted to understand better.
So when you're a director of a company, there's a lot of responsibilities that go with that, fiduciary duties, etc. Was this what you were becoming uncomfortable about?
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't actually realized, but we hadn't had one board meeting. This is like 18 months into a company's existence, a new company, a company with a big public profile. And I was getting calls from, people like you and others saying, what's happening with SAA? And I said, I actually have no idea. I wish I could tell you something. I can only tell you what I read in the media and what I consume in the media. I don't have any insight. And, it got to a point where it was just, crazy that was happening, and needed to resign as a director.
But Gidon, you were going to be the skills for the new South African Airways. The fact that you're not involved now, is there an alternative? Is somebody else being drafted in?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I go on what I read in the press, and what's come through, I think, in the last few days is that there's an international team or partner or something that's that they've had discussions with. I don't know who they are. I don't know what the details are at all. But I do think it's a bit of a shame, and this is hopefully not a selfish thing, but I think it would be a shame not to use the local skills which exist. I think with great depth. We have incredible skills in the industry here. We have great talent. We have people that really want to roll up their sleeves and get involved and make a difference. I think it would be a shame to have to bring in an international team to save South African national asset.
The rumours, if you like, because there has been no confirmation, is that Emirates have tried to buy South African Airways, 2 times already, or try to do a deal with South African Airways, and that they might finally now get it done. Is that has that whole story had anything to do with your decision to withdraw?
I don't know. Even if that discussion took place, I remember, you'll recall, probably 6 or 7 years ago, I think when Nico was the acting CEO, he had tried to do a deal with Emirates, and then it was pulled at the last minute by the minister at the time, which I think in some respects was a shame. Emirates obviously is a massively successful and large, international airline. So I really don't know, Alec, in terms of what those discussions are made up of.
But why now? Why at this particular juncture did you decide to withdraw?
I think it was just, getting to the point, from a time point of view, it's now, 18 months since this thing was announced. If anything, I think, if I look back, I probably should have resigned earlier. We've been kept out of the loop for a long time now. But it felt to me like, this is, I had requested meetings, directors meetings over the last month or so, with no response, and I just started seeing red lights. I mean, I wasn't even getting a response to a meeting request or a call request. And that just, made me increasingly worried about what was going on.
As a 20% shareholder in the Takatso consortium, that clearly is a big issue as well. Are you going to be, or the group that you represent, are you going to be withdrawing from that?
Well, we've got our shareholding. Our teams spent many months putting the deal together, putting the business plan together, investing their intellectual property into the consortium. So, I mean, we're not about to give that up, but certainly we're not active shareholders at this point at all, and are, just silent shareholders, really, observing how things unfold. But from this point, taking no responsibility, and certainly no fiduciary responsibility in terms of the activities of the consortium.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, you've done a heck of a lot of work. That work has then been used in the discussions with the Department of Public Enterprises for the Takatso consortium to take the 51% shareholding. But you were a director. Now you're withdrawing as a director. So if they botch it up, well, your downside is opportunity cost, really. It's all the work that's been put in. Yeah.
Listen, we put it in good faith. I mean, we had some time. We had built up a strong knowledge base. We were happy to help, and we've said, even as minority shareholders, we want to help. We want this thing to succeed in whatever format. There's potential here. I think the damage to the country, not only from a funding point of view and continued funding that the business is needing, but from a reputational point of view and from a sentiment point of view, I just think it would be a great pity if there wasn't a solution that was found to get this thing up and running, make it work, and just put something forward that South Africans can be proud of.
Gidon, I know that it's probably got nothing to do with it, but it is a bit of a reflection. The incident with the A320 South African Airways plane that was being taxied, and then the engineer who should have been watching what was going on from inside the aircraft, going off to the toilet at a critical moment, and the coupling coming off, and that aircraft damaging a Fly SAF airplane quite badly, and of course its own as well. That sends all kinds of signals about the way SAA is being managed at the moment, and that would have been surely a huge challenge for anybody going and trying to manage or trying to turn the thing around.
Yeah, Alec, I suppose one has to see what happened. It was very worrying and concerning, and could have been a real safety issue. So that must be properly investigated. I mean, what I can say, Alec, is that we've been dealing with a number of people at SAA today, and there's still great skills and competence there. Some incredibly talented people with decades of experience. Many of our staff at Lyft, senior leadership staff, cabin crew, airports, the teams at the airport, many of them come from SAA and are the highest quality people I've ever worked with. So it's a shame when you have this this embedded talent that really does not have the environment that they can thrive in and become successful. So that's part of what we would love to do, is to work with these talented, high quality people and ensure that the organization is successful.
Is SAA going to continue, in your opinion?
Well, I think the funding issues obviously has to be solved. There's an outstanding piece that I know is being debated in terms of whether government is going to plug the hole, that the historic hole that exists there, and then obviously future funding will be required to make make the business sustainable. We don't look at obviously funding's critical in any business, especially a capital intensive one like an airline. But our approach is get the right team in place, get the right business plan, get the right culture going within the organization, and if you get those components right, the funding kind of flows quite easily. If you don't have that right, who's going to want to put in money, and who's going to want to back it? So we approach it from that point of view. Just get the fundamentals right, get the team right, and then and then get the funding in place.
Do you feel, though, that given this focus that you've had to have on South African Airways, that it might have kept Lyft, your new airline, perhaps given it, affected it in some way, that it hasn't taken off quite to the degree that it might have?
No, not at all, Alec. I mean, it surprised me, and I think many others. The success of Lyft in a very short space of time, and I take very little of the credit, because the team, John and the team, have been incredible. Just done an incredible job. In 2 years, they launched it in the middle of COVID. They've had the fuel price going crazy. They had a price war with Comair before it ultimately went into liquidation. Made the competitive environment very difficult. So it's done everything right. It's hard to fault them, and it's more recently had a good growth spurt. It added 4 planes from the initial 2, or to the initial 2. So it's doing great. I wouldn't have hoped for anything better.
Are you going to be more involved there now, though?
Well, I'm not. My skills, Alec, as you know, it's not not to be involved on a day-to-day basis. It's not where my skill set lies. I prefer to try and coordinate things and think strategically about the business and the opportunities, and that's where I see a great potential to work together with SAA and to do something. There's something to be done. We just got to find the right formula, and I'm still at this point optimistic that there is a solution. If one's creative enough and open enough, there's business problems can generally be solved, and I think this is one of those.
But if they don't call you, you're not going to be calling them. You're off the board.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of this consortium, we're not involved, and we talked to the team at SAA. They're very open. We cooperate with them in several areas, and we'll continue to do that.
Is it possible that another consortium might come to the party here?
Who knows? I have no idea. There's not many investors that understand airlines and have an appetite for airlines. They, have a history of volatility and unforeseen risk factors playing a part in the success of the business. So I wouldn't say there's a large number of potential buyers for an airline generally, and for an airline with the kind of legacy issues that SAA has, very difficult. And that was proven when the DPE went through that long process to try to find a buyer, and they couldn't find one.
But it seems like such a mess. From a taxpayer's point of view, we've put tens of billions of rands into South African Airways. Now it seems no closer to a solution, certainly from the way you've outlined it as an insider in the process. What are we to make of it as taxpayers?
Yeah, I think there's got to be a line in the sand. And I mean, if there is one good thing that's come out of the last couple of years, is that the government has made it very clear that they're not going to be throwing good money after bad into assets that that are not, well, I'm going to say not strategic, and that might be a debatable point. But if you really look at it from an aviation point of view, I mean, there's a number of local players in the market, very competent local players. There's very strong regional competition from the likes of Ethiopian Airlines, who are highly competitive and efficient. And then the international airlines are incredibly, have massive scale, guys like Emirates and Qatar, and Turkish Airlines and many, many others. And so, one really has to look at, where can we compete and how can we compete? This is not this is a very strong competitive set in an environment post-COVID that, has changed potentially fundamentally. If you look at business travel, for example, our view is that it would be nice to think business travel will recover completely, but it may not. It may be that video conferencing has, had a permanent fundamental shift in terms of business behavior. Leisure travel is coming back strongly, which is good, and it seems like it's going to continue. But there's fundamental changes, and a new business, whether it's SAA or any other airline in the space, needs to take that in.
Gidon Novick, former chief executive of Comair, the co-founder of Lyft, and until recently a director of the consortium that's buying South African Airways. And I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.